This is Dr. John Tolson, and you're listening to the Disciple Making Podcast. In Matthew 28, Jesus gives a command, not an option. A command, not a suggestion. And so he says in Matthew 28 to the disciples at the time, the 12 disciples, actually 11, because one of them went astray. And then also for all believers of all times, this is what he said. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations. Make disciples of all nations. So therefore, as we've been studying, the question is, what in the world does it mean to make disciples? If you look up the 269 times the word disciple is used in the New Testament, and you do all your due diligence, throw all of your findings in the top of a funnel, out of the bottom of the funnel will drop three things that disciple making means. Number one, a disciple is a learner. We said true learning, biblically speaking, only takes place when it changes how I live. So just because I have information about the Scripture does not mean I am living the Scripture and doing what it says. True learning only takes place when it changes how I live. Number two, a disciple is a follower. It's someone that sticks to Jesus like an adhesive. He's my leader. I'm not his leader. I report for duty every day to ask him how he wants me to live and what he wants me to do. But the third thing a disciple is where often we have neglected to understand this and implement this. So a disciple is not only a learner and a follower, but a disciple is a reproducer. It's an individual that takes primarily what Jesus has built into our lives in terms of our faith and deliberately, intentionally giving that to another person in such a way and with the intent that that person will do the same thing for others that I did with them. And when I release them and they start discipling somebody else, then I take somebody on new. So that that whole reproductive multiplication emphasis begins to take place. So you always ask, which is greater in terms of growing, addition or multiplication? Jesus' strategy was multiplication. It's disciple making. What's Jesus call us to do? Well, he calls us, number one, and primarily to love him. So how do I know if I love Jesus? In John 14:15, Jesus said, if you love me, then do what I tell you to do. In this book, one of the things he tells us to do is to go make disciples. Who make disciples? Who make disciples? And that is to be part of our lifestyle. Not just one of 50 things that we do as a Christian or we do in a church. It is to be the thing that we do. That is God's strategy to change the planet. So that's what we've been covering in Red Glasses over, several months. Actually, we started January the 23rd. So there are several things I want to ask you to do as we close out this particular series on Red Glasses. Number one, if you go to a church, and hopefully you do, contact your pastor, and please have your pastor contact us so that we can start a conversation on how we might be able to help your church and churches in your community to be equipped and trained and set them loose in terms of making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And I got to tell you honestly, as I've said before, there are very few, maybe a handful of churches in America that are doing what we have been talking about doing. Secondly, pass this series along to other people that know Christ, that would be ready and hungry and enthusiastic about receiving not only this training and equipping, but they would go out and begin discipling. Number three, you find somebody and start discipling. Take that 4 priority book that we talked about, the 4 priorities based on Matthew 22. Find you someone that's willing to be discipled and someone that will make a commitment to disciple others. You begin doing it. So many stories I could tell you about people that are engaged in making disciples who make disciples. And I can tell you one thing for sure, it is life-changing. So, here it is. Matthew 28, go therefore into all the world and make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. I pray that each of us, for the rest of our lives, will be willing to be obedient to what Jesus has asked us to do. not only think about that, but I hope you will do something about that. Thanks for listening to the Disciple Making Podcast. Check out our website at thetolsongroup.com and sign up for my weekly encouraging videos called Red Glasses Talks to come to your email every Monday morning. You can also find me at Dr. John Tolson on social media. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me a review and share with a friend.